So I'm an associate member of LEAP, and we have interviewed multiple LEAP ex-cops on the channel, and I urge people out there to fully support LEAP and the important work they're doing, because they are ex-cops and ex-prosecutors and judges who see the insanity of drug laws and the war on drugs, and they're trying to make real-world changes. Now, those ex-cops have expressed that violence all over the world, from knife crime in London, the majority of it, to hundreds of thousands dead in Mexico, are a consequence of drug laws. One of the ex-cops said to us, look, when you see some kid get stabbed in London, yeah, newspaper report says, he was a captain of the football team or whatever, he had this bright future ahead of him. But these kids are all competing for that illegal black market profit in drugs created by drug laws. So, from your research then, what are the most extreme violent situations you discovered have been created by drug laws? I know you went to a prison and interviewed a young hitman
Yeah,
for the
Rosalio.
cartel.
Well, I think the thing to understand, and I was taught this by lots of people, from Rosalio Retta, who was a hitman who, between the ages of 14 and 17, butchered about 70 people, to my friend Chino Hardin, who was a former crack dealer in Brooklyn, who's one of the smartest people I know, a whole range of people. But I think that it's really important for people to understand this dynamic. And to me, although what we do to people with addiction problems, and indeed drug users who don't have an addiction problem, who are a big majority of drug users, that's monstrous. But to me, the biggest thing about the drug war, the biggest moral atrocity of it, is precisely what you're describing. And it's really important to explain this to people. And I'm about to see it happen with the thing that happened on my street. And so usually what happens is this violence is described as drug-related violence, right? And when you hear the phrase drug-related violence, generally what you picture is someone using drugs, losing their shit, and attacking someone. That does happen sometimes. We know exactly how much. So in 1986, there was a very good study. Actually, it was a little bit later, but they were looking at the figures for 1986 by a guy called Professor Goldstein that I cite in the book, that looked at, okay, how much of drug-related violence, the stuff that was classified as drug-related violence in 1986 in New York City, was what we picture, someone using drugs and going crazy. It turned out that was 3% of what was called drug-related violence. There was another, I think it was 4%, exact figures in the book, I'm pretty sure it's 4%, that was someone who had an addiction problem, who was carrying out a property crime like burglary, got caught and committed some act of violence, right? The vast majority, all the rest, was something very different. If you want to understand it, just picture, right? Anyone watching, imagine that you went out now and decided to steal a bottle of vodka, right? So you go into a shop, you pick up a bottle of vodka, you try to walk out. If the people in that shop catch you, they'll call the police and the police will come and take you away. So they don't need to be violent. They don't need to be intimidating. They've got the power of the law to uphold their property rights. Okay, they've got the force of the state behind them to protect their property rights and stop you stealing their vodka. Okay, now imagine you're going to go and steal a bag of weed, unless you live in a place where it's been legalized, or you go and steal a bag of coke or a bag of meth or whatever it might be. If the person selling that in your neighborhood catches you, obviously he can't ring the police, right? The police would come and take him away. He's got to fight you. But he doesn't want to be having a fight every day. So he's got to establish a reputation for being such a badass that nobody would be so foolish as to fuck with him. So he has to create what the sociologist Philip Bourgeois called a culture of terror, right? He's got to really frighten people. So what you get is the war on drugs creates a war for drugs, as the writer Charles Bowden put it, right? When you ban drugs, there's no longer any recourse for the people who have them to the state to uphold their property rights. So people who have them can only defend their property through violence or the threat of violence, right? And if you want to understand how much of this violence is the direct result of prohibition, just ask yourself, where are the violent alcohol dealers? Does the head of Smirnoff go and shoot the head of Heineken in the face, right? Does your local pub send its staff to go and beat the shit out of the people who work in the pub around the corner? No. Exactly that happened under alcohol prohibition. And it ended the day alcohol prohibition ended. There's a guy at Harvard, you should interview him, great guy, called Professor Jeffrey Myron. did a graph of the murder rate in the United States in the 20th century. Massive spike up when alcohol is banned, falls like a stone when alcohol is legalized again. I remember someone else you should talk to, one of my favorite people, Sebastian Marroquin, who's his original name was Pablo Escobar Jr. He's the son.
Yeah, we've had him on the channel, and
I love Sebastian, don't you?
I
Great
asked
guy.
him who was the biggest drug lord of the 80s. Was it your dad or George H.W. Bush? And he had a laugh, and he said it was George H.W. Bush.
Well, Sebastian, I remember Sebastian saying to me in a Burger King in Buenos Aires, I remember him saying to me, the only thing my father truly feared was the legalization of drugs, right? If drugs had been legal, my dad would have been a used car salesman and you would have never heard his name.